They mocked a simple woman on a flight, sneering at her casual attire and questioning her right to be in first class. The flight attendant pointed with disdain. They had no idea she was the newest Supreme Court justice. As tension mounted and insults flew, no one expected how dramatically this confrontation would change lives when the truth was revealed. Sometimes the most powerful people are the ones you least suspect. The early morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Justice Elena Morgan's modest Georgetown brownstone. At 58, with her silver-streaked hair pulled back into a simple ponytail and minimal makeup, she looked more like a university librarian than one of the most powerful legal minds in America. Just 7 days ago, she'd been confirmed as the newest justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, a position she'd never imagined holding when she started as a public defender decades earlier. "Some tea before you go, Ellie?" her sister Catherine asked, setting down a steaming mug. "Thanks, but I should get moving," Elena replied, checking her watch. "The flight's in 2 hours, and you know how security can be these days." Catherine sighed. "I still don't understand why you're flying commercial. They'd arranged transportation for you." Elena smiled as she packed her well-worn leather messenger bag. "The official ceremony isn't for another week. Until then, I'm just regular old Elena Morgan going to visit her sick sister in Chicago." "There's nothing regular about being appointed to the Supreme Court," Catherine countered. "Maybe not," Elena conceded, "but I've spent my entire career fighting for ordinary people. The moment I start thinking I'm special is the moment I lose touch with why I'm doing this job." Catherine knew better than to argue. Elena's humility wasn't an act, it was the cornerstone of her character. Pulling on a simple white t-shirt and tucking her silver-streaked hair through the back of a navy blue baseball cap, Elena grabbed her bag. The cap had belonged to her late husband Michael. Wearing it made her feel like he was still with her, guiding her through life's challenges. "You sure you don't want me to drive you?" Catherine asked. "The taxi is already on its way," Elena replied, hugging her sister goodbye. "Besides, I want to be just another passenger today." As the taxi pulled away, Elena's phone buzzed with a message from Chief Justice Harrington. "Security team not pleased about your solo trip. Call if you need anything." "Congratulations again, Justice Morgan." Elena smiled, tucking the phone away. She'd insisted on traveling without security just this once, promising to keep a low profile. After next week's ceremony, such moments of normalcy would become increasingly rare. At the airport, Elena moved through security efficiently, her government ID raising no eyebrows. Her face hadn't been splashed across newspapers yet. The administration had respected her request to maintain privacy until the formal announcement. Settling into a quiet corner of the terminal, Elena opened a dog-eared paperback. Not the legal briefs people might expect, but a mystery novel she'd been meaning to finish for months. "Flight 1867 to Chicago now boarding," announced the gate agent. "First-class passengers may now board." Elena stepped forward, ticket in hand. The gate agent barely glanced at her as she scanned the boarding pass. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Morgan." The first-class cabin was half full when Elena located her seat, 3A, a window position. She stowed her small bag beneath the seat in front of her, rather than using the overhead bin. Old habits from years of economy travel died hard. A man in an impeccably tailored suit occupied the aisle seat beside hers. He glanced up briefly, his expression shifting from expectation to thinly veiled disappointment as he registered her casual appearance. "Morning," Elena offered with a smile. The man nodded curtly before returning to his financial newspaper. The bold headline caught Elena's eye. "Supreme Court expected to make historic appointment." The irony wasn't lost on her. More passengers filed into the cabin. The demographic was telling. Mostly men in business attire, a few elegantly dressed women. Elena, in her t-shirt and baseball cap, was conspicuously underdressed. A gentleman across the aisle, mid-60s, expensive watch, signet ring, kept glancing her way with a frown. Something about him seemed vaguely familiar to Elena, but she couldn't place him. The lead flight attendant, a blonde woman with perfect styling, moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, offering pre-departure drinks to passengers. Her smile was professional, but warmed noticeably for certain travelers. When she reached Elena's row, the warmth vanished. "Something to drink before takeoff?" she asked, her tone notably cooler. "Just water, please," Elena replied. The attendant nodded briskly and moved on, returning moments later with a plastic cup rather than the glass tumblers other passengers had received. As the final boarding announcements were made, the man across the aisle leaned toward the flight attendant, whispering something that made her glance back at Elena with a frown. "Everything all right, sir?" the attendant asked, loud enough for Elena to hear. "Just wondering about the passenger standards these days," he replied, making little attempt to lower his voice. The flight attendant nodded with a conspiratorial smile. "I understand, Mr. Blackwell. I'll be keeping an eye on things." Elena sat quietly, pretending to read her book. The name finally clicked. James Blackwell, corporate attorney. She'd ruled against his firm in a major labor case 3 years ago, when she was on the federal bench. The cabin door closed with a decisive thunk, and the aircraft began to push back from the gate. 20 minutes into the flight, the seat belt sign dinged off, and the cabin sprang to life. Flight attendants emerged with drinks and warmed nuts for first-class passengers. The blonde flight attendant, whose name tag read Victoria, worked her way methodically through the cabin, her service impeccable for most passengers. When she reached Elena's row, the warm, professional smile she bestowed on others froze into something perfunctory. "Beverage?" she asked Elena, without the mom she'd used with other passengers. "Cranberry juice, please," Elena replied pleasantly. "We typically reserve the specialty juices for our regular first-class travelers," Victoria said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Perhaps water or coffee would be more appropriate." From across the aisle, James Blackwell cleared his throat. "I don't mind if she has my juice allocation, Victoria. I'm sticking with scotch today." The comment was charitable on the surface, but the condescension in his tone was unmistakable. Elena was being treated like a charity case. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Blackwell," Victoria replied with a genuine smile. She turned back to Elena. "You're in luck." Elena accepted the juice without comment, though she noticed her glass was only half filled compared to other passengers' beverages. A young man 2 rows ahead kept glancing back, his expression curious. Something about his attentive gaze suggested he wasn't just another judging passenger. When Victoria moved to another section, the gentleman beside Elena addressed her for the first time. "First time in first class?" he asked, his tone suggesting it must be. "No," Elena replied simply, returning to her book. He seemed put off by her brevity. "Business or pleasure trip?" "Family visit," she said, offering the smile she perfected during decades of courtroom poker faces. "You must have accumulated quite a few miles," he persisted, clearly fishing for how someone who looked like her could afford the premium cabin. Before Elena could respond, Blackwell chimed in from across the aisle. Or perhaps it was one of those discount upgrade offers. The airlines are practically giving them away these days. Dilutes the experience, if you ask me. The man beside Elena nodded in agreement. True enough. Hard to justify the premium when it's no longer exclusive. Their conversation continued as if Elena weren't present, discussing how standards had fallen across the industry. The subtext was painfully clear. People like Elena were the problem. Victoria returned with a snack basket for Blackwell, skipping Elena's row entirely. When Elena politely raised her hand to request service, Victoria's response was immediate and loud. "Ma'am, you'll need to be patient. I'm serving passengers in order." Several heads turned, and Elena felt the heat of embarrassment despite herself. She'd faced down corporate legal teams and hostile witnesses without breaking a sweat, but public humiliation still had the power to sting. The young man who'd been watching discreetly slipped his phone from his pocket, angling it subtly toward his tray table. "Did you see that hat?" Victoria whispered loudly to another flight attendant as they passed with the beverage cart. "Probably picked it up at a garage sale." The hat in question, Michael's old Stanford Law baseball cap, was indeed weathered, but it held more value to Elena than anything else she owned. Blackwell's phone rang, and he answered it without hesitation, ignoring the airplane mode requirements. "James Blackwell speaking," his voice carried deliberately. "Yes, I'll be presenting the Eastridge brief to the Supreme Court next month. The new appointment. Please, another academic with no real-world experience." Elena felt a moment of recognition. Blackwell was scheduled to argue before her bench in just a few weeks. He had no idea he was currently disparaging a justice who would be deciding his case. As the flight progressed, the slights accumulated. Elena's meal was served last. Her coffee cup wasn't refilled. And when she asked for a blanket, Victoria informed her they were reserved for our frequent travelers. "I'm sorry, but that can't be airline policy," a new voice cut in. The young man who had been observing stepped into the aisle. "Either blankets are available to all first-class passengers, or they're not available at all." Victoria's expression hardened. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "Actually," he replied, holding up his phone discreetly, "I think it might concern a lot of people." "Are you recording this?" Victoria's voice rose. "That's against company policy." "Is treating passengers differently based on their appearance also company policy?" he countered. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face drained of color. Blackwell's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. The woman in the expensive suit suddenly became intensely interested in her phone screen. "Is this true?" Victoria finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena sighed, removing her baseball cap and running a hand through her silver-streaked hair. "I was hoping to travel privately today. My sister is ill in Chicago." Recognition dawned across multiple faces. Her confirmation hearings hadn't been widely televised, but her appointment had made the news. Without the cap, and with context provided, Justice Morgan was suddenly recognizable to everyone. I had no idea," Victoria stammered. "We didn't receive any VIP notification." "That was by design," Elena replied. "I specifically requested to be treated like any other passenger." A pause. "Though I admit this wasn't quite what I had in mind." The transformation in the cabin was immediate and palpable. Victoria's posture changed from confrontational to deferential in the span of seconds. Her hands, which had been gesturing accusingly moments before, now fidgeted nervously with her uniform. "Justice Morgan, I am so terribly sorry," she began, her voice pitched higher than before. "If I had known." "That's precisely the problem, isn't it?" Elena interrupted gently. "You shouldn't need to know someone's title to treat them with basic dignity." The young law student who had identified her stepped forward. "Justice Morgan, I'm Marcus Chen, second year at Georgetown Law. Your opinions on Merrimanville Global Tech were the focus of our constitutional law seminar last semester." Elena smiled genuinely for the first time since boarding. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Chen." Blackwell, who had been frozen in mortified silence, finally found his voice. "Justice Morgan, please accept my most sincere apologies. I had no idea. The lighting in here, your casual attire." "Is that your argument, counselor?" Elena asked, her tone light, but her eyes serious. "That you couldn't recognize me due to lighting and attire, so you felt justified in suggesting I didn't belong here." Blackwell paled. "No, of course not. I was completely out of line." Other passengers were now craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the newly appointed justice. Phones appeared in hands throughout the cabin, though most people had the decency not to point them directly at Elena. The captain's voice came over the intercom, breaking the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, We're beginning our initial descent into Chicago. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." Victoria, still visibly shaken, moved mechanically through her duties. When she reached Elena's seat, she attempted another apology. "Justice Morgan, I want you to know that my behavior doesn't reflect the values of our airline. I'm truly sorry for how I treated you." Elena looked at her thoughtfully. "I believe you're sorry now that you know who I am. The question is whether you'd be sorry if I was simply Elena Morgan, a woman in a baseball cap traveling to see her sister." Victoria had no response to that. Marcus Chen, the law student, was still recording discreetly when Elena glanced his way. He quickly lowered his phone, looking guilty. "I hope that footage is for educational purposes, Mr. Chen," she said with a small smile. "Actually, ma'am, Justice Morgan, he stammered. "People should see how you were treated. It happens every day to regular people who don't have your position to protect them." Elena considered this. "You make a fair point. Just be responsible with it." As the plane began its descent, the atmosphere remained charged. Blackwell buried himself in paperwork, avoiding eye contact. Other passengers whispered among themselves. Victoria moved through the cabin robotically, the confidence in her demeanor completely evaporated. Elena simply returned to her book, outwardly calm, though her mind was already turning over the implications of what had just transpired. By the time the plane touched down at O'Hare International Airport, news of Justice Morgan's presence and the incident had somehow spread beyond the confines of the aircraft. As passengers disembarked, Elena noticed unusual activity at the gate. A cluster of airline officials waited anxiously at the jet bridge entrance. Behind them, smartphones captured the moment as first-class passengers emerged, each face scanned by eager observers looking for the justice. "They know," Marcus Chen whispered as he passed Elena in the aisle. "I didn't post anything yet, but someone on the flight must have texted ahead." Elena nodded her understanding. So much for traveling incognito. The airline's Chicago operations manager stepped forward as Elena appeared. "Justice Morgan, on behalf of our entire company, please accept our deepest apologies for any inconvenience during your flight today." The carefully chosen words, inconvenience, rather than discrimination or harassment, told Elena everything about how the airline hoped to frame the incident. "Thank you," she replied simply, continuing toward the terminal. Inside, a small crowd had gathered. Some were clearly journalists, others appeared to be curious travelers. Flashes popped as Elena walked through, her baseball cap now clutched in her hand rather than on her head. A representative from the Supreme Court security detail approached, looking relieved but displeased. "Justice Morgan, we've been trying to reach you. Your sister called when she saw reports on social media about an incident on your flight." "Reports already?" Elena asked, genuinely surprised by the speed. "It's trending, ma'am. Justice in first class." As if on cue, Marcus Chen approached cautiously, his expression a mix of apology and determination. "Justice Morgan, I want you to know I didn't post my video," he explained, "but someone else on the flight shared the story, and it's spreading fast." Elena nodded. "Thank you for telling me, Mr. Chen." Before she could say more, James Blackwell appeared, flanked by two men in suits who looked like corporate crisis managers. His face was ashen. "Justice Morgan, please," he began, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "What happened on that flight was inexcusable. I hope you'll allow me to personally apologize and assure you that my behavior today in no way reflects my professional conduct or the values of my firm." What went unspoken was clear. Blackwell was scheduled to argue before the Supreme Court in 3 weeks, and he had just spent an hour insulting one of the justices who would hear his case. Elena regarded him thoughtfully. "Mr. Blackwell, I've always believed that how someone treats a person they perceive as powerless reveals far more than how they treat those they fear or respect. Today was educational." She turned to the security detail. "I'd like to go see my sister now, please." As they escorted her through the terminal, the buzz of conversations and the distinctive sound of news alerts pinging on phones followed in her wake. By evening, the incident had exploded across all media platforms. Marcus Chen's video, which he eventually decided to release after consulting with his ethics professor, had been viewed millions of times within hours. The clip showed only the confrontation's peak moments and Elena's dignified response after being identified. The hashtags #FirstClassJustice and #JudgeByLooks dominated social media discussions. In the airline's corporate headquarters, an emergency meeting stretched into the night. The company's stock had already dropped 3 points in after-hours trading. Their initial statement characterizing the incident as a misunderstanding had only fueled public outrage. Victoria, the flight attendant, had been placed on immediate administrative leave. Her tearful interview request with a major network was declined by her union representative, who advised complete silence. James Blackwell faced his own reckoning. His law partners convened an emergency conference call where the discussion centered not on principles of equality, but on damage control. Their firm specialized in corporate cases before the Supreme Court. Having a named partner personally insult a justice was potentially catastrophic for business. "You need to recuse yourself from the Eastridge case," his senior partner insisted over speakerphone. "Better yet, take a sabbatical until this blows over." At her sister Rebecca's modest Chicago apartment, Elena sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea and watching the media storm with a mixture of dismay and resignation. "I never wanted this kind of attention," she told her sister, who was propped up against pillows on the couch, recovering from surgery. Rebecca shook her head. "Maybe you didn't want it, but perhaps it's necessary. Look at what people are saying. This is starting conversations about how we judge people based on appearance." "I suppose," Elena conceded, "though I doubt that flight attendant or James Blackwell are feeling particularly enlightened right now." "They're not the audience," Rebecca pointed out. "The millions of people watching their behavior are." Over the next 3 days, the story evolved from viral sensation to national conversation. Major news networks ran special segments on appearance bias and invisible privilege. Editorial pages debated whether Justice Morgan had been targeted because of her gender, age, or simply her casual attire. The airline CEO appeared on morning television, announcing a comprehensive review of customer service policies and mandatory sensitivity training for all customer-facing staff. The company's stock continued its downward trend, with a total loss of nearly 8% since the incident. "We've clearly failed to live up to our own standards," she stated gravely. "What happened to Justice Morgan could have happened to any of our passengers, and that's unacceptable." Victoria, the flight attendant, released a written statement through her attorney. "I am deeply ashamed of my actions and have begun the process of examining the implicit biases that led to my behavior. I offer my sincerest apologies to Justice Morgan and to anyone who has ever felt judged or diminished based on appearance." The most dramatic fallout, however, centered on James Blackwell. His firm announced his temporary leave of absence, and he formally withdrew from the upcoming Supreme Court case. Legal blogs speculated that his career arguing before the High Court was effectively over. In Chicago, Elena tried to focus on her sister's recovery, but the constant ping of her phone made it difficult. The Chief Justice had called, expressing both concern and support. The president had issued a statement defending her character without directly addressing the incident. "You've accidentally become a symbol," Rebecca observed, browsing through news coverage on her tablet. "Of what exactly?" Elena asked. "Of not judging books by their covers, of quiet dignity in the face of prejudice." Rebecca smiled. "For someone who wanted to travel anonymously, you certainly made an impression." Elena sighed. "I just wanted to be treated like everyone else." "Maybe that's exactly why this story matters," Rebecca replied. because everyone should be treated with respect, regardless of title. 2 weeks later, Justice Elena Morgan stood on the steps of the Supreme Court following her official swearing-in ceremony. The formal photographs had been taken, the official statements given. Now, as the crowd of reporters began to disperse, a familiar face approached cautiously. "Justice Morgan," Marcus Chen said, extending his hand. "Congratulations on your formal investiture." Elena smiled, recognizing the law student immediately. "Mr. Chen, thank you for coming. I wanted to apologize again about the video," he said. "I never expected it would go that viral." "No apology necessary," she assured him. "Sometimes the right thing and the comfortable thing aren't the same." Marcus nodded, visibly relieved. "I've been offered summer internships at 3 civil rights organizations because of it. They said they liked my ethical instincts." "They're right to," Elena replied. "Use those instincts wisely." As Marcus departed, a court aide approached. "Justice Morgan," the Chief Justice asked if you could join him in his chambers when you're ready. "There's someone he'd like you to meet." In the Chief Justice's ornate office, Elena was surprised to find Victoria, the flight attendant, seated nervously on the edge of a chair. "Ah, Elena," the Chief Justice greeted her. "Ms. Winters here has been working with our Public Education Division. She's helping develop a program about bias recognition for high school students." Victoria stood, her hands clasped tightly. "Justice Morgan, I know no apology can undo what happened, but I wanted you to know I'm trying to learn from it, to make something positive come from my mistake." Elena studied her for a moment. "That's all any of us can do with our mistakes, Ms. Winters. Learn from them and try to do better." Later that evening, as Elena unpacked in her new chambers, she came across Michael's old baseball cap. After a moment's reflection, she placed it prominently on her desk, a reminder that justice, true justice, sees beyond appearances. 6 months after the incident that came to be known in legal circles as the first-class confrontation, Justice Elena Morgan sat on the bench hearing arguments in a landmark discrimination case. The courtroom was packed with observers, including law students who had specifically come to hear her questioning. Among them was Marcus Chen, now interning with the ACLU. He watched as Justice Morgan leaned forward, addressing the corporate defense attorney. "Counselor," she said, her voice measured but penetrating, "you've argued that professional appearance standards are necessary for business operations. Could you define what constitutes a professional appearance in your view?" The attorney hesitated, perhaps recognizing the trap. "Your Honor, that would depend on the specific workplace environment and industry standards." "Indeed," Justice Morgan replied. "And who determines those standards? Are they objective measures, or are they influenced by subjective perceptions and biases?" Her questioning went to the heart of the case and reflected the national conversation her own experience had helped ignite. In the months since the airplane incident, discussions about appearance-based discrimination had entered corporate boardrooms, school classrooms, and legislative chambers. The airline had implemented comprehensive bias training for all employees, featuring anonymous case studies, including Elena's experience. Their stock had recovered as the company emerged as an unexpected leader in corporate diversity initiatives. James Blackwell had announced his retirement from legal practice, citing a desire to reconsider my contributions to the profession. He was now teaching legal ethics at a small Midwestern college, a humbling but perhaps ultimately redemptive career shift. As for Justice Morgan, she continued to wear Michael's baseball cap during her morning walks to the court, a private reminder of who she was beyond her robes and title. In her chambers hung a framed needlepoint sampler, a gift from her sister Rebecca. "Justice is blind, but people rarely are." It served as both a mission statement and a challenge, one that Elena Morgan embraced every day on the highest court in the land.